We all have our rules. The rules of our nation, the rules of our state, the rules of our community, the rules of our family, even the rules of our faith. Maybe we try to soft pedal them by calling them suggestions or guidelines, sort of like how I like to say our worship service is about an hour long, while the website clearly states that it goes from 10 to 11. Guideline versus rule, and one we will likely break this morning. In my family of origin, I was the child who was perfectly comfortable with the idea of rules, for at my core, I am a rule follower. From the start, I will wonder what can be done within the rules of any situation, as I assume that the rules are there for a good reason. My brother, on the other hand, was and continues to be a rule breaker, or at the very least, a very aggressive rule tester. He will, from the start, ask, why? And then begin to do something just outside the boundaries that have been set. In my immediate family these days, we, like all families, have our rules. We try, as I imagine we all do, to not simply employ arbitrary rules, but rather offer some sort of rationale for each one. I like to believe that Elena and I are, as we determine these rules, thinking about why along with exactly what. And hopefully we are not being overly legalistic about it, remembering that it is the spirit of the rules that really matters most. For instance, we have a family rule about not using our phones during family times, meals, family games, on family outings, etc. It is possible that we could have come up with this rule proactively, recognizing the importance of such times, but that's not how it really worked. At various times, both Elena and I have allowed ourselves and our attention to be drawn away from the family and to our phones when it was not absolutely necessary. Checking Facebook, looking up something very important on IMDb, checking our daily steps while sitting at a table. Since this all happened in Thomas's first year of life, his phone use was not an issue. In any case, we agreed on this rule to not have phones out during family times, and for the most part, we do pretty well in following it. There are times, however, if we are expecting an important call or text, or if someone attempts to reach us more than once, thus suggesting a level of crisis, that we allow the rule to be set aside. For you see, the spirit of the rule focuses on the importance of family time, but not necessarily over and above everything else. Our passage this morning centers around just this sort of conversation. It is, as we have become accustomed to reading about, yet another confrontation between Jesus and the religious leaders of his time, this time the Pharisees. Once again, I feel it's important to recognize that this caricature of the Pharisees in the New Testament is an over-exaggeration of the perspective of the religious establishment. For the purposes of these particular leaders, it was important to challenge Jesus as he represented a threat to their authority. And for the purposes of the overall narrative, these individuals provide an all-important foil to the protagonist in our story, Jesus. But for this particular story, their embodiment of these roles provides Jesus with a wonderful teaching moment. The importance of Sabbath in Jesus' time was never in doubt. It was a common practice in the Jewish faith, prescribed by God and articulated by Moses in the tradition. It was, as we know, my friends, one of the Big Ten. So Jesus is at no point suggesting that the people not keep Sabbath. The central question at play in this passage is not the rule itself, but the purpose of Sabbath. Embedded within the text is a wonderful teaching moment by Jesus about the spirit of the rule. For it is Sabbath to simply be a day of rest and restoration, and one that we must protect at all costs? or does it have a deeper purpose related to the quality of life for the living? I have on more than one occasion had the opportunity to speak with Jewish colleagues about this text, and I'm always interested to hear what they have to say. To a rabbi, each has pointed out that at its core, the motivating purpose of the Sabbath laws focus not on a prescribed day of doing nothing, but rather on the importance of rest and refreshment as it relates to the quality of one's life. My friends, the idea behind encouraging, even prescribing a Sabbath day is more than just telling folks to go home and put their feet up. It's a day for a break from that which takes our attention away from that which is most important. In Christian terms, that which is most important is captured in another lesson about love of God, of neighbor, of self. But even more than that, the Sabbath prescription, centering on quality of life, also calls for all people, even the earth itself, to get a break. From work, yes, but also from suffering and from destructive influences. So in the latter part of our story, when Jesus acts to heal the man with the withered hand, boldly healing on the Sabbath, while he may be violating a legalistic approach and application of the Sabbath law, he is acting in harmony with the spirit of that law, offering the man an improved quality of life and an end to his suffering and marginalization. In similar circumstances, whether the stakes are as high or not, we all need such a break, for there are destructive influences in each of our lives. One of the phenomena of our time that I find most interesting is what seems to have become the valoration of busyness. In many of our personal interactions, should we find the time in our schedules for such interactions, we tend to lead with it. I recall times and places in my life, maybe you do as well, when people you would meet would lead off by giving you their resume, almost as if they were trying to prove their worthiness to you in a first interaction. These days, it seems that such interactions focus more on that which fills our time, as if we are attempting to prove our worth or justify ourselves with our impossible calendars. Representing one of those institutions in people's lives that often asks for their time, I know and affirm that we are busy people. Trust me, I get it. And given that reality, I think it is important that we consider the spirit behind this call for Sabbath in our lives. For when we are stretched, overworked, overburdened, overscheduled, overprogrammed, despite the good things that may come from these commitments, the quality of our lives is threatened. And this is the case for children, for youth, for young adults, for parents and other adults, even for the supposed retired among us that have somehow succeeded in filling every waking moment. Such overprogramming can become a destructive influence. Imagine what the Pharisees from our story would say to and about us today. I know that Matthew and I do, but is there anyone else here who allows work to creep in on a Sunday? And yet I'm not sure Jesus would come to our defense on this one. For while he was not one to focus on a strict understanding of the Sabbath law, as we have already noted, he did believe in the spirit of the law. And my friends, I think we far too often ignore the spirit of this law as well. Vacations alone or with family or friends are wonderful, but they do not accomplish this goal of Sabbath. The idea of Sabbath is a regular practice of rest and refreshment. We must not allow ourselves to reach the point of burnout, the point of exhaustion, even the point of sickness before we stop to breathe, before we stop to recognize that we are compromising our quality of life. We are part of a culture today that will always ask for more. Our families, our jobs, our clubs and organizations, even, I will admit, our church. Perhaps we might consider setting an example, setting some boundaries, and setting ourselves up for a better quality of life. And perhaps we might give others permission to do the same. Let us hear Jesus' message about the spirit of Sabbath that we are called to incorporate into our lives. And let us embrace it. Just don't save all of your no's for the church. All right? Amen.